See participants coming in. That's always a good sign. We'll wait till we hit about 50 and we'll get going. Okay, we're at 53 right now. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Direct Sourcing Forum Fall Webinar. This is our last webinar this year. It's our 12th webinar. We've just finished 3 years of doing webinars, so kind of an exciting milestone. Today, we plan to talk about artificial intelligence, definitely a very hot topic. So for the folks in the audience, if that's what you came to learn about and see, you're definitely in the right place. We registered 362 attendees today, representing 19 countries. I want to extend a special welcome to our guests from the United Arab Emirates, American Samoa, Australia, Canada, Germany, Spain, Finland, France, Hungary, India, Mexico, Malaysia, Netherlands, New Zealand, Philippines, Poland, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Many thanks for joining us. Let's get started. So today, we're honored to welcome 5 very distinguished guests from HR technology leaders in our industry. And we hope to discuss AI from an insider's perspective. Let's go ahead and meet our panelists. Let's start with Jennifer.
Brian, thanks for having me. My name is Jennifer Byrne. I'm the Chief Product and Technology Officer for LiveHire, which is a total talent acquisition company and very involved in the direct sourcing space, most particularly in the US. I have been in HR tech for 3 years, but the bulk of my career has been more generally in technology, formerly the CTO of Microsoft US, which is where all of my interest and understanding of AI started. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Ashir?
Yeah, hey everyone. Glad to see all the folks out here. So I'm Ashir Sharaf. I lead up our talent acquisition, flex, and resource management for Eightfold. Also, prior to this, I ran and co-founded a startup inside of EY called Gig Now, which was really about disrupting the direct sourcing for contingent hiring. So excited to be here, excited to talk about AI.
Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it. Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Jason Safely. I'm the CTO for Opptly. Opptly is an AI company. We have a contextual skills-based matching algorithm that really is focused on removing the friction between talent and work. I have over a decade of workforce solutions experience between staffing, MSP, HR tech, and a little over 20 years experience just within the IT space, product analytics, and data science. So excited to share my perspective today with everybody.
Thanks for being here. Jim?
Yeah, good day. Thank you, everyone. I'm Jim Kramer. I'm with IBM, and I'm a product sales leader supporting IBM's newest technology within AI, watsonx, Orchestrate specifically. And if you've watched any sports lately, you've definitely seen our commercials, and looking forward to participating and sharing information on AI. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. And last but not least, Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Hey, everyone. My name is Justin Lumby. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and a founder in a company named TalentNet. TalentNet is a direct sourcing platform that's been in business since 2013. Today, we count our customers through Europe, North America, Asia Pacific. Prior to TalentNet, I held a variety of roles in corporate procurement, human resources, and talent acquisition. Nice to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And then finally, I'm Brian McGuire. I lead sales at Talent Belt. We help businesses plan, build, and roll out successful direct sourcing programs. Let's get started with our questions today. So it seems like the most appropriate place to start would be to define what is artificial intelligence. Who wants to take a cut at that?
Yeah, I'll go. That's a big question. The answer can be extremely complex or very simplistic, and so I'll try to cut through that here for the purposes of this webinar. AI is a branch of computer science that deals with the creation of intelligent agents, which are systems that can learn, reason, and act autonomously. AI research has been highly successful in developing effective techniques for solving a wide range of problems, from game playing to medical diagnosis. And one way to think about AI is as a way to automate tasks that would normally require human intelligence. So, some examples of that, AI systems being used to drive cars, diagnose disease, and I'm sure we're all familiar with like writing articles, generating content in that form. AI systems can be used to create new products and services, such as virtual assistants that augment the human worker as digital labor, using a platform like specifically IBM's Watson X Orchestrate. Um, Simply put, I believe that AI really is the next evolution in software, kind of stripping out all the magic and the verbose language. AI is systems that are taught to simulate human intelligence and thought processes.
So let's unpack the word intelligence a little bit. How would you define that? Would you say intelligence basically boils down to problem solving?
It's problem solving, it's reasoning, it's deductive thinking, it's considering choices, pattern recognition. It's all of those things.
Mm-hmm. And one other quick follow-up. You mentioned learning in your definition. What exactly do you mean by that? How does a machine learn?
That's a great question. Machine learning is primarily the use of large language models that we're most familiar with, specifically around ChatGPT, Bard, granted with IBM, other large language models. And it learns by taking in huge amounts of data and given very specific parameters and algorithms by which to research and kind of digest the information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's good. So that, I guess the next logical question would be, how does artificial intelligence work? So you've given us kind of an idea. Does anybody else want to take a cut at that?
I would love to, Brian,
Yeah.
if I can.
Please.
Yeah. So first of all, great answer from Jim. AI is such a huge topic. So I think the biggest hurdle for people to cross is to just get a kind of a mental framework for what it is, because there's so many sort of facets of it. The way I often describe an AI system versus a non-AI computer system, you can also, instead of saying computer system, you could also just say algorithm, because people use that word a lot. What is an AI algorithm versus another non-AI algorithm? And I think the most succinct way to say it is that an AI can learn. A computer can be super smart. It can run a calculus level algorithm, but it doesn't necessarily know anything as the end result of that process. So AI is differentiated in terms of what it can learn. So if you're asking how it works, what it really is doing is pulling in data. If you could, the analogy for a person, you're born and day one of your life, you know absolutely nothing. You have mental constructs and cognitive capabilities, frameworks in your brain neurologically, but you don't know anything. So you have to, as a human, ingest data. It's the same principle. AI learns from ingesting large amounts of data. What it does, that just like a human, is it can see patterns across data. So it can reason across many large data sets, and then sort of not without any other context, start to learn. So the analogy that's often used in this space is cats. If I were going to sort of have an AI system learn about cats, it might read 1 million words of stories about cats, and ultimately it would notice that every time it sees the word cat, it also sees the word animal. Cat's an animal. It might say, every time I see the word cat, I see head with pointy ears. Okay, now we know something more about cats. It can learn and use that context for further learning. We call that oftentimes deep neural networks. It mimics the brain so that it has many layers of understanding. First, I know a little bit. Eventually, I know a lot. We talk about large language models, Brian. I have a feeling we're going to get there. And so just a little bit around AI, how it works. That's how it works generally. But there are lots of different types of AI. Hopefully we get there in this conversation. So ChatGPT is able to take text data and learn about text. There are other kinds of AI that would take images or ingest large images and learn about vision. So if you think about self-driving cars, that's a very different kind of AI. GPT is a large language model. ChatGPT is the chatbot in front of GPT. It's a large language model, so it's really designed to understand text. There are similar models that do different things in different spaces. When we talk about data, we're talking about like an internet size data. And when you think about large language models, so ChatGPT, which is sort of it has us all abuzz right now, has really ingested kind of the internet, if you will. So it's got a lot of data to learn a lot of things. There are smaller language models that oftentimes people will use, or I think all of us here might be using, which have smaller parameters and might be designed to ingest not just the internet of data, but data specific to a company.
No, that's a great and thorough answer. Appreciate that. You and Jim both touched on something, and I'd like to maybe unpack this a little bit more. And we are seeing questions about it too. What are the disciplines within artificial intelligence? It seems to be mushrooming right now, and you guys have mentioned a couple of different applications. So, what are the different disciplines and applications, just so the folks in the audience can start thinking in terms of what's out there? Does anybody want to take a cut at that? Oh, I see Ashir talking. You may be on mute.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I wanted to make sure I was silent for everyone else from all the background noise. But yes, I'm interested in raising my hand for that one, right? So I think it's an interesting time that we're in. I'll start off with a few that I think are very applicable for the talent space, the space that we all operate in, right? So I think there was, machine learning algorithms, and still are, that typically of what most people think about in the talent space for the last 20 years. And I'm just going to sort of boil it down to, again, if you think about how resume parsing worked, or how you were identifying skills, or even some of the, enhancement to the Boolean searches that most recruiters were doing every single day of the week. That was machine learning, right? I would say the last 20 years of talent has been heavily focused on that sort of aspect. But then if you take the next leap, over the last, I'd say 6, 7, 8 years, deep learning AI has really started to take hold. And a lot of the folks that I'm sitting around in this Zoom meeting are leveraging that capability and understanding how to apply that every single day of the week to understand talent. And what that's doing is using two things. One, vast number of data sets, huge amounts of data, so that you can really see true interpretations of where the right people are for the right opportunities, right? So I think about what Eightfold does when it comes to matching, right? How do I identify the right person for the right next role? How do I make predictions? How do I define the outcomes of where this person's going to head on their career trajectory? All of those sorts of things. And then again, using deep neural nets to sort of identify this. So do a lot of calculations very quickly so that you have a really good understanding of that, and then adding weights to all of those things to really understand where this goes. And then the last piece that I think that has really gotten exciting in the last bit, and I'll save all the other things that are happening in AI, but natural language processing, right? And and again, sort of where I say the leap in the last year, generative AI, right? Which is taking a combination of machine learning algorithms, deep learning algorithms, and then tying it all together with natural language processing. So be able to look at sentences, look at a lot of variables of data, and understand the outcome of where something is headed, how things move forward, where you should be filling in the blank. And so, when I think about it in the talent space, there isn't a single approach that really works. Now it's about using all of the tools at our disposal, right? Using generative AI, using deep learning models, using machine learning algorithms that were designed years ago to pull it all together, that you can basically look at someone's resume, look at someone's opportunity to be fitting a role, and determine who is going to be the best fit there, that, and use it in a very simple textual interface.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hope that helps.
No, it definitely helps. And I love that we started very broad and we're sort of getting more and more focused on what it is, what it does, how to apply it. We have a question about specific to talent acquisition, specific to, maybe even HR functions, but in the realm of talent acquisition, how is AI being applied right now? Does anybody want to take a cut at that?
Yeah, I'll grab that one, Brian. I think your imagination is your only limitation in this space, honestly, relative to AI. I think when you focus on the outcomes and you focus on any friction point that you have in the TA workflow, I think that's very eligible for a positive AI impact. And there's top of mind, there's like 5 segments of the workflow that really are great fits for AI solution. And content creation, we've already touched on that. ChatGPT. What's more painful than writing a job description, right? What's more painful than writing a resume from a candidate perspective? And then a level of AI automation relative to outreach, right? Engagement. So that generative AI is a great fit for some of those pain points in that upfront process. Beyond that, engagement, right? Where there's a lot of buzz around conversational AI, engaging with candidates at a level that we couldn't possibly do at scale by sourcing a team to manage that input channel to a recruitment team or a curation team. And there's AI assistance relative to conversational AI, right? You see these jobs boards being stood up around, conversational AI to qualify candidate to offer up opportunities. And then at Opptly, the talent matching, the more of a predictive AI where you are using an algorithm to really determine the symmetry between jobs and roles. And what that does from an outcome perspective is it frees up those individuals in your organization to do more value-driven type of activities, right? Your relationship building, your right fit evaluation, so leveraging AI automation or AI solution to take away that top of the funnel type of activities is extremely important. And then to continue down the path, talent assessments, there's great providers out there from an AI perspective that does skills assessment beyond just the evaluation of the skill symmetry. It's the evaluation, do they actually have them, which is a pain point in our space. And then to wrap it up, probably the most mature segment of AI in our space is around analytics. Analytics, data science and analytics has been around for a long time relative to rate card evaluations, market data, and so forth. So just to kind of wrap that back up, I think, internally from an organization perspective is really analyzing the friction points in your workflow and then be creative in your introduction of AI and really understand your readiness to introduce AI into your talent acquisition process.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Got kind of a follow-up on that. What talent challenges is artificial intelligence best at solving? We just listed them. We haven't heard from Justin. You want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. And maybe I'll just build a bit on sort of what Jason was going through there. So maybe just even taking this to sort of the human and user level. I think that ultimately a lot of the innovation that we're seeing now in AI can really help optimize and create efficiencies in experiences, both experiences for recruiters and talent acquisition professionals, but also the candidate side. And I think that's candidates, job seekers, job applicants. I think that's an important aspect of this as well. Maybe just to preface quickly, like I go back in my mind to early 2000s and managing corporate recruitment teams. And for some reason, I have this memory in my head of sitting in my VP's office at the time, and he's telling me, like, there's too much demand on us, we can't get enough done. And I'm sort of drawing this pie graph on a whiteboard and explaining that, over 60% of our time right now, of my team's time, is just going into reading resumes. Like that's what we're doing. We're not actually meeting with candidates. We're not having, valuable sort of whatever it's a coffee meet and greet or a phone call. We're really spending our time screening resumes. And so certainly there is, I think there's some concern out there around control around bias when you've got, algorithms and AI models that are screening resumes. But at the same time, I think we have to just be real about the fact that all of us have inherent biases as well in us, right? And so it's a matter of this being sort of an evolution and something that, again, sort of going back to some of Jennifer's points, we have an opportunity to train these models and to train these technologies with that consciousness in mind that there are biases. I think beyond some of the obvious or maybe the earlier sort of activities that are being handled by AI now around screening candidates, et cetera, we can also think about an improved candidate experience. As a job applicant, no one likes filling out endless forms that just go on and on, submit application. At the same time, some of the organizations we work with, they have just the sheer size of demand of applicants. It can't possibly be processed by the recruitment teams. So having more of a rich and interactive, applicant experience that isn't sort of form-based and is maybe making use of some of these generative AI models and chatbots is really, I think an enriched experience for a candidate, where not only are they applying for a role, but maybe they're learning about the organization, they're learning about the culture of the organization, and they're really deciding for themselves as well, is this an organization that I want to work with?
That's a great, I can't remember where I read it. I read a statistic recently that candidates are more likely to hear back from an AI driven process than they are from a human driven process. And if anybody wants to call me to task on that, I'll find the source. I read it in the last couple of days and I'll share it with anybody who's listening, but I thought it was an interesting statistic. We've got another question, which maybe is I think a natural follow-on to what Justin just shared. What industries or verticals in particular are the most successful early adopters today? We're curious, what are you guys seeing in terms of talent acquisition? Who are the early adopters? Who's succeeding? Who wants to take a swing at that?
Yeah, Brian, great question. I appreciate that. I believe, HR and more specifically talent acquisition is best suited for early adoption because of the level of applications that are used, but also coupled that with consistent manual repetitious work that goes into the work of talent acquisition. So it's mostly ubiquitous across all industries. I've read a stat that most talent acquisition representatives are working across 13 different applications, and they're through them roughly 30 times a day. So there's a lot of movement within the applications and a lot of manual work that takes place. However, industries that are kind of the most successful early adopters are typically those that are highly competitive and have a high demand for skilled workers. So industries like technology companies, financial services, healthcare, and even manufacturing. Uh, Overall, I'd say that AI is a powerful tool that can be used to improve talent acquisition in a variety of industries, but early adopters of AI are already reaping serious benefits. As an example of that, IBM as client zero, we've been able to save more than 42,000 hours a year, which translates to like 60% reduction in process in the hiring of contract labor. So, more and more organizations are following suit. This is definitely not something that is kind of but slow to launch. It's extremely important, and it's not really a matter of if, but when.
Mm-hmm. Jim, are you seeing a distinction between, say, white collar and blue collar roles? Are people seeing more success in one versus the other, or is it sort of universally applicable?
Honestly, I believe, and others could chime in here. I think it's fairly universally applicable. Now, there are certain jobs that are, more plug and play. Maybe certain types of manufacturing work, service type work, where this can easily be implemented and launched and then upscaled. But by and large, this is something that works very well across a host of industries and
Mm-hmm.
roles.
Okay. So a follow-up question to that, what real world ROI should adopters expect from artificial intelligence, from applying that to talent acquisition, and maybe give some ideas on how they might measure that? Who wants to take a swing at that?
Brian, I love that question. I'd love to take a crack at it. I think ROI is a really, really important topic. And if I think about who might be listening on this in this webinar, it might just be worth a second to unpack ROI and think about it a little bit systematically, because AI is so broad, and the blessing and the curse of it. It has an almost unbounded potential to add value, but the unboundedness of it makes it difficult to measure in the context of business priorities and financial and near-term priorities. So ROI for AI, I think of it in three categories. Number one is productivity, and many of them Ashir sort of touched on, so we'll sort of harken back to his earlier statements. Productivity, right? AI should offer an existing efficiency gain. And in productivity, I think you think about AI being applied to existing processes. So I'm sourcing candidates, I'm engaging candidates, and I have an expectation around my process that it will produce a certain amount of value over time. If I apply AI to that, can that process become more efficient, faster, require less resources, et cetera? So there's a productivity gain, and there's certain kinds of, frankly, more basic AI machine learning that have been being applied to business process for quite some time. And so that's probably the easiest to measure. The second category of value or ROI is in the transformation of existing business processes. So if this isn't about making an existing process faster, it's about full scale adopting a new process that AI made possible. And so if we think about, and there are lots of examples here, but maybe reporting and analytics, I have a process to pull all sorts of data out of my systems because I have a dozen or so really important metrics that I want to measure over time to fill rate, recruiter productivity, whatever it might be. But I ingest all that data and then I get it in a report with pie graphs and whatever, and I still have to sort of reason over it in my own time. I may have people who do that for me. That report might get emailed around and there's a monthly meeting around it. Can AI cut to the end of that story? So now I actually have a very different business process for reporting and analytics. So that's a business process transformation. That's a little harder to measure. It is sort of a combination of objective metrics and a little bit of intuition around how will that business process change over time? What is the efficiency gain I can get kind of in the future as I perfect that? And then the last category where I think AI is most exciting and has captured our imagination is in the experience that it creates, a very different experience. And so if you were handling phone calls or emails or texts, and you can all of a sudden get a really good chatbot, not just any chatbot, but a really good chatbot to completely disrupt the engagement of candidates who you might find are difficult to capture. You might be looking at them for hard to fill roles, and they're here one day, they're not here one day, and that engagement process we all know is super difficult. Can AI completely transform that experience? That's probably the hardest to measure. You can do sentiment analysis, you can do A/B testing surveys, NPS scores. All of that will get to the value of it. It's probably the most intuitive of all the measurements. So I think about ROI as an early adopter. Think about what you're using it for first, and then try to determine what your baseline is right now and how you might be able to measure the difference that you hope to achieve. And that it's a little different from productivity, existing process, new process, and experience. And I think I have to say this, that the other part of ROI, we always think about it in terms of positive value, but there's also the negative value. So ROI really is net value, where you've looked at all of the aspects of it. And I think we always have to think about the do no harm of AI as well. I think there are rightly questions around bias and how do we make sure that the AI we're using doesn't create as many problems as it solves. And quick thing there is really look at, if you're ingesting AI from a product or you're actually pulling a model into your own environment yourself, think about what is the model trained on. So GPT is the model, ChatGPT is the chatbot for the model. Did the model get trained on data that was unbiased, and did it use the right parameters and learning techniques to control for inadvertent bias? If you were then putting your own data into the model on top of the data it sort of already got trained on, is your own data structured so that you're not creating bias at your input level? And then finally, as you use AI, if it shows up as a feature, it's a drop-down field, it's a chat box, it's a text thing, are you properly controlling for bias there? So when you think about ROI, think about net ROI, all the positives and controlling for the negatives.
Great. Appreciate the detailed answer and the Steve Jobs quote about "do no evil." We like that. Let's go a little bit further in terms of training AI. How should users successfully train AI? I mean, I think maybe Jennifer opened a can of worms with that whole concept of bias and so forth. How do you do this well? How do you train AI? Who wants to take a cut?
Yeah, I'll grab that one. And it's a great pivot point from what Jennifer had mentioned in her response. There's some assumptions that need to be made relative to training AI. It's, your understanding of your outcomes. It's your selection of a correct model is really important in making sure your outcomes are what they are. But in our space, data is king to train your model. The type of data matters, the structure of the data matters. If your data is unstructured, AI models still need a level of annotation to be able to make those predictions as an output of the model. But like Jennifer mentioned, it's like, how specific do you want your model to be? Do you want it to be ChatGPT, where it's good enough at everything and it's training on the Internet of Things? Or do you want a model that's really good in our space, that's trained on relevant data within the workforce space? Because context matters, right, when the AI is interpreting information. So Java could mean coffee, or Java could mean a skill that a software developer would have. That's why you really have to be specific on the data that you're pulling together and you're training your model with. And Jennifer also mentioned this as well, is bias. This is where bias is introduced. And when you introduce a data set that is inherently biased, the outcome is going to be biased. So there's a lot of analysis when you are preparing and collecting your data set for training that can mitigate a level of bias in the initial outcomes of your model. And the attributes that you feed your model can introduce a level of bias as well. So it's a constant focus on the data that you're pushing through. But clean data is king relative to training your model. And then there's a commitment, right? So once you train your model, your job is not done. There needs to be continued emphasis on making sure the outcomes are exactly what they are. Make sure you're not overfitting your model. And what overfitting is when you make your model too restrictive. So in our space, if I'm creating an AI model and I only push IT data through that model and I introduce healthcare profiles to it, it's not going to necessarily know how to get the desired outcome from a data set that's broader than what you're training it on. So there's a lot of things you can do relative to training of the model, but it all comes down to validation, analysis, and not invoking a level of bias when you are introducing data, and then also when you are validating the outcome of the data and accepting the outcome of the AI model. So there's a lot of ways to kind of mitigate that. And ultimately, when you're done training your model, it's setting up an instrument in which you can continuously validate the outcomes. And that is really where like a truth deck comes into play, is every time you introduce a new segment of data or a new block of data, you've got to revisit the model to make sure the outcomes are exactly what you need.
It almost sounds like a new discipline in universities, or something you would train a TA, team member or a curation team member. It's almost its own standalone thing, training a learning engine. So very, very interesting answer. How would an organization know if their artificial intelligence application is working optimally? Not just working, but working optimally. Who wants to take a swing at that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Again, playing a little bit on what Jennifer and Jason were both talking about, right? So you've got some good structure here. You've got an understanding of how you're leveraging the data. You've got vast amounts of data coming into it. I think that the challenge that most organizations sort of face is the world is moving very fast, and you need to be able to sort of understand, what data is being used inside your talent acquisition space or your talent space, and how is that turning into outputs for the organization, right? So oftentimes what we're doing with a lot of our customers is working through the different parts of the life cycle a candidate, an employee may go through, a contingent worker goes through, and understanding what things from their inputs are turning out into what outcomes from the back end of things, right? So let's take, for example, the idea of, very popularized in the last few months, the ability for someone to go into ChatGPT and take their resume and, beef it up to fit the job description, right? So, doing a better job against matching. Does that actually, with the algorithms that an organization is using, does that actually turn into that candidate showing up higher on the rankings? Does that candidate show up, further down the pipeline? Does that candidate then eventually become a better fit for the organization? And looking at all of those pieces are very vital to helping a customer in this segment work with their vendor to really understand, what are the end results of the investments that they're making in artificial intelligence, right? I think, Jim, I think you were the one that was saying 60% of the, was spent on scanning through resumes, right? The ability to improve that has a lot of positive impact, but again, you got to make sure that the right people are coming through the front door and they're making it through the process and really effectively looking at that. And so it's, again, understanding the inputs from a data quality perspective that you're putting into it, making sure it's very anonymized, making sure that you guys are leveraging the right insights, and then really, really focused on the outcomes, right? Does someone that was hired through AI matching algorithms really stay longer in the organization? Provide the high quality sort of inputs at the end of the day. And so having a systems in place to take that feedback in and make sure that you're constantly tuning against it is vital to the ultimate outcome of, making sure it's working optimally. And that's just one use case, but I think that as you start to sit down with, the vendors that are helping you, move forward in this process, it's asking those questions and understanding how, you can really understand the insights at a deep enough level to make sure that the outcomes are happening.
I can't help asking this question. Do you see a potential in the future for like a chat GPT generated job description to attract a chat GPT generated resume from a candidate so that you basically have AI talking to AI on both ends?
100%. I mean, again, I think that's the thing that we're trying to avoid, right? Is again, I think, when you think about job descriptions today, right, most of them are templatized. They're pretty poorly written, especially in the contingent space, because they're going out to, vendor management systems. But now you have the ability to at least improve the quality of it. But I would tell you that majority of the candidates out there in the world are now using ChatGPT to improve their process to submit the right application. And I think there's pros to it. I think you just got to weigh out, what does that really mean at the end of the day? Who are you matching against? Are you finding the right people? And if you're using a lot of the, as I talked about, the machine learning algorithms from 20 years ago, it's just going to look for keywords, and you're going to fail at this. And so you have to evolve the technology at the back end of this.
Maybe just to jump on that quickly as well. I read an interesting article that Wired.com published yesterday. So not just sort of a single individual optimizing their resume and then sort of a recruiter optimizing sort of a job, and as you said, Brian, AI talking AI, but they were sort of profiling this computer engineer out of the Bay Area who'd used an AI model to auto apply to all these jobs, and over a 24-hour period was able to submit 5,000 applications with 2 computers running in his house, and admitted that his hit rate was less. It was somewhere around like 2% when he's applying on his own, and around 0.5% through the spot. But he sort of threw up his hands and said, well, who cares? At 5,000 applications over 24 hours, I'm still getting dozens of interviews. So that's a real demand on recruiters and talent acquisition organizations that they are going to face at some point more broadly.
That's a great story. And actually, we have a question that just came in from somebody who may be a recruiter, who said, what would you say to a recruiter who's afraid of losing their job to AI? So that's a good segue. Do you want to just continue and unpack that, Justin? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think to some of the earlier comments, that this space is evolving so quickly. I think part of the answer is that we just don't know. I mean, we know there's going to be impacts. We know there's going to be transformation in roles as well. I think if you even go back a couple of years ago, a lot of the predictions, even just getting away for a moment from talent acquisition, was that the AI and sort of the automation, augmentation that it brings is first going to come after sort of lower level, quote, simpler blue collar work, and then, progressively more complex work. And now we're seeing that in many scenarios, like there's, AI models that are better at analyzing MRIs than radiologists, and yet we're still having challenges, with in robotics and AI to, for simple task management. So it's interesting that it's not really moving, the impacts aren't really moving sort of along that continuum that we maybe predicted a couple of years ago. I think as it relates to recruiters and talent acquisitions, one of the things that we talk about within TalentNet is sort of this I guess, fun aspirational concept of turning recruiters into superheroes, right? And the idea that, how do we use these technologies to really empower a recruiter and give them superpowers? Recruiters, being a former one myself, there's Achilles heels there, right? So we've talked a lot about sort of the administrative burden that's on recruiters. But if you think about a recruiter's role too, they're often asked to, for example, evaluate, dozens or hundreds of candidates across dozens of different technical domains that they don't really have expertise in, right? So many of these emerging AI models can help them with things like generating interview questions, even evaluating answers, helping them sort of work through that. And I think at the end of the day, the most important benefit that these AI models can bring to talent acquisition is really bringing more empathy sort of back to the position and less task-based work, right? So one of the things, at least today, that we're not seeing AI sort of replace is, that human to human connection and understanding, another human's aspirations in their career, what their potential is. I mean, there's different skill mapping models that certainly can make predictions about, where a professional could go. But I think, again, empathizing at a human level, understanding one's aspirations, and really being able to walk hand in hand with a candidate, the more we can sort of emphasize and accelerate that work and replace the more monotonous task-based work with these models, the more we can give those recruiters superpowers.
Nice answer. And Jim, I'm reminded of a conversation you and I had a few weeks ago where you said AI should really be called augmented intelligence and not artificial intelligence because it sort of augments human capabilities. So,
yeah, definitely. I saw it come up in the chat, but IBM's point of view isn't that it's going to replace jobs, but it will replace workers who aren't using and embracing AI.
No, good to know. Let's move to another question. There's been, sort of recent press about, what do you do? How do I say this? There are, people who have concerns about how learning engines are trained and things like that. And the question is this: is there a way to watermark AI generated content to sort of separate it from human generated content? Like, what do you do if your AI content goes off the rails? How do you identify that so you can redact it quickly? Who wants to take a swing at that one?
Yeah, let me grab that, Brian. I'm actually going to take this probably two different directions. One is really around the origination of content, right? So watermarking is possible to varying degrees depending on the output or the instrument in which you're outputting. So right now, the most mature watermarking is really relative to like binary files. So your images, your videos, your audio files that inherently have metadata that you can bake in to identify those types of files and the origin of those files, whether that be AI or some other source. That's a bit more straightforward. I think what we're seeing now is the text generation is a little bit trickier from a watermark perspective. There's ways you can embed like words and phrases that will identify that it's generated from an AI model. But the hard part with text generation is it can be copied, manipulated, pasted, and that watermarking would be stripped away from the output of the text generation. So I think there's a lot of progress that can be done in that space, but right now it's a little bit unreliable and easy to circumvent from a watermark perspective with the text generation. And I think that'll improve every time, right? As the AI gets smarter, as the capabilities to identify AI generated content gets a little bit more robust, I think that'll come a long way. The second place I'd probably take this, maybe even more relevant to our space, is user acknowledgement that AI is being used, right? So I think that's a little bit more impactful to our industry is there's so much sensitivity around a person's evaluation by an AI solution that I think what we'll see, and we're already seeing, is that there will be more of an explicit consent to an individual's use or individual's profile being interpreted by AI, similar to how we throw a data privacy consent up there when someone registers for an application. The amusing part of this is I really feel like it's generational. I think our generation, yeah, we want to know. I think my kids' generation, they don't care. It's assumed that some level of AI is going to be used because it's used in everything else that they're doing from a retail perspective, in their experiences, tools to be more effective in their jobs. So, just my perspective, I'd be curious to see how this acknowledgement of AI in the future is actually really needed when it becomes really core to the fabric of who we are, in what we're doing from a society perspective.
Yeah, interesting observation about it. Just one quick follow-up. Would you say that there are emerging standards regarding watermarking? Is anybody sort of trying to standardize this right now?
I actually went out there and I did a little bit of research. So there are some leading experts or leading companies in our industry who are generating the capability to do watermarking that are creating some of this capability. I think what's actually dictating the need to watermark is legislation relative to AI in various regions of the country and the world. So I think the watermarking will probably follow that, and then we'll be chasing that to adhere to it.
Okay. Oh, good. We're going to just take a quick pause here for a second. We usually put out a poll during our webinars. I'm going to go ahead and launch this, and hopefully it won't become a distraction for us, but we like to gather the sort of the voice of the audience while we're doing this. If we move on to our next question here, it's sort of an extension of something that was discussed earlier, and that's, I think, training data sets. We talked about large language sets, external data sets versus internal data sets. How can a user know if their internal data is adequate for training? What are you typically looking for to make sure that a data set can be used to effectively train AI? Who wants to take a cut?
Yeah, so oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, no, so I'll jump on that. Again, a couple things that come to mind, right? Some of the work that we've been doing with a lot of our customers on this is, again, three areas, right? Really about how is responsible model building happening, explainable and interpretable models, and then sort of bias audits and studies, right? And if I double click on everything, right, when we start at the beginning of this, in anything that we're doing in the AI front, a good understanding of, what are we doing with the data? How are we understanding that? How are we looking across and building a robust set of algorithms that mitigate any sort of bias that may be incurred? So when you look at what we're doing from a matching perspective, what's interesting here is we're looking at anonymous data across all of our organizations that participate in this. And so, any sort of bias that's introduced by one customer versus, the group data set, don't really get inflicted upon everyone else. And so those are some of the things, I think, also reducing things like gender, race, age, disability, religion, taking that out of the model, stripping out any PII information. Those are key to having good, clean data. And so then when you're working with, a new customer coming onto the platform, when you are ingesting their data and making sure that it works within the algorithms, it's being able to take all of those things and cleanse it out of it. To really focus on how do you explain the things that are happening, right? So that, AI is not a black box, that you understand the outcomes of why someone is being presented forward as a good match for this role, right? What are the things that are standing out on their profile that make them a really good fit? easy and intuitive for any recruiter, anyone using the system, right? Like we don't want to confuse it. We don't want to use all technical jargon. We just want to say, hey, look, this person's a good fit. You don't have to be a data scientist or an AI expert to be able to leverage the technology that anyone here on this panel is talking about, right? So it's simple and intuitive. And then the last bit around this, I think best practice right now is being able to participate in bias audits. So using your own internal bias audits, but it's additionally participating in a lot of AI studies that are going on. Being at the forefront of working with regulators in this space and ensuring that the things that you're doing that are helping people move forward in their talent careers are being unimpacted by biases that may be introduced, right? And again, I think, Justin, I think you mentioned that, again, we are all inherently biased in sort of the way we do our work. And I actually think that AI can be a lot more fairer play on this opportunity and the ability to identify the right talent as you move them through the process.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for the answer. We've got kind of a, I guess, a fun question here. Somebody asks, what is ChatGPT 4.0 and what are the anticipated features? Who wants to take it?
I would love to take
Jennifer, please.
Yeah, ChatGPT. Well, it's at a very basic level, it's just the next version of ChatGPT 3. So it's this space AI is moving so incredibly fast. And that's the fun part about it. So ChatGPT 4, it just came out, and it's if you think about what a model, an AI model is, there's a simple way to describe it, which is that it's kind of think of it as a box, and there's the depth and the width of the model. And if you're kind of in the AI model conversation, that's typically how they're referred to. So a large model, a large language model is an example, would have a lot of depth. We talked about deep neural networks. So you could think about that simplistically is the number of layers of processing or thinking. It's kind of how your brain, you start out knowing a little bit of something and then you learn more about it. So there's the layers of thinking. That would be the width of the model, and then the depth of the model, and then the width of the model are the number of parameters the model uses to learn a thing. So parameter is just like a specific measurement. Is cat always black or sometimes black? Does cat always have pointy ears or only sometimes? That's sort of the measurement. Chat GPT, these are large language models, so they're much larger than typically what somebody might use in their own organization. Chat GPT 3 uses 175 million parameters. Chat GPT 4 uses 100 trillion parameters. So many orders of magnitude larger. And I say that because it's first of all, to me, it's just a fascinating and an awe-inspiring thing about AI, because it's evidence of the progression and the fast evolution of the space in general. But it also is very important for users of it because it allows ChatGPT 4 to be much more nuanced in the questions and the dialogue that it creates. So it can hold state longer, meaning you can have a longer and more nuanced conversation with it, and it will remember the context. ChatGPT 3 does that. ChatGPT does that much better. And it's very it can be very nuanced with respect to communication style, which is something that ChatGPT 3 didn't do as good of a job at. And why that matters, I think, for all of us is because ChatGPT is a chatbot, right? We've talked about it. It is a generative AI model, meaning it creates content, and it creates content in written form. So when you have a really big model, it allows you to get very, very subtle and sophistication around tone. So if you think about the way that you might engage candidates, having the nuanced communication to really engage and capture interest is, there's a lot of near miss opportunities. And this is now an opportunity to do that really, really well. So I think just in terms of its business applicability, ChatGPT 4 is very interesting. I have to put a plug in now for other models because ChatGPT caught the world on fire, right? Because it was the first opportunity for just everyone to see the power of AI without having to understand it. But if we think about AI in general, Anthropic is a wonderful company that's doing a lot around explainability, responsibility, transparency of AI models. They have a competing model called Claude 2, which is like ChatGPT. Facebook has one. There's a great company called A121 out of Israel. It has a model called Jurassic. So ChatGPT, GPT are not the only versions of large language models that are super applicable to this space. It's just the one we tend to know well, and I think we'll ever, always hold it near and dear to our heart. So there's that. The last little thing that's fun about ChatGPT 4 is that it's what they call multimodal, meaning that it can, with an underlying model called GPT-4V, V standing for vision, also understand image. So I think to the very beginning of this, Brian, when you were asking about what's the difference, is it artificial intelligence? How does it relate to human intelligence? You'd mentioned augmented intelligence. Here's the thing about us. We actually derive intelligence from many different sensory inputs, right? We hear things, we read things, we also see things. We understand our kinesthetic awareness. That would be robotics. A model that is able to learn from multiple senses gets us much, much closer to what I would consider actual human intelligence. And that's what GPT-4, I think, as of September or October, is introduced into the game.
Yeah, nice
Super fun.
answer. Yeah, I think the deep fake aspect may be coming too, and interesting. I wanted to see if we could take a couple more questions here. We're down to about 4 minutes. One of the questions is, what are the most promising untapped opportunities for AI and talent acquisition? Who wants to take that?
Yeah, Brian, I'll jump on that. So I think over the hour we've touched on a bunch, and I won't sort of go through and reiterate all of those. I think if we look forward, there's some that are sort of directly in the talent acquisition space, but then also sort of talent acquisition adjacent, and then moving forward into workforce planning. So, one of the most interesting areas I think that we'll see start to really evolve and progress is the idea of career pathing and career planning, and that can even happen at the talent acquisition stage. So really understanding, different potential career trajectories for different employees, or in the non-employee space, contingent workforce workers, and that can be a benefit both for the organization who is, evaluating a candidate and what their sort of not just potential today is potential tomorrow, but it can also be almost a personal advisor, if you will, to the job seeker applicant who's really trying to understand within the context of an organization, where can I take my career? And I think beyond, having some predictability there, you're also just creating sort of organically a stronger bond from the beginning, because both the organization and the job seeker applicant in this case have a stronger sense of not just where am I today, but where am I going? And I think furthering on that, that can lead into much more advanced workforce planning. So, as we see sort of these models grow and able to ingest much larger data sets and even real-time data, the ability for an organization to look at global market trends, internal performance data, combine that with even potentially economic forecasts, and really then guide their organization in terms of where they should be directing their recruiting, where they should be sort of building out teams, where they should be sort of hosting projects. So I think all of that sort of coming together, you've just got a much stronger sort of, again, understanding not just of where we are today as an organization, as a job seeker, but where are we going? And is this something that, that I'm invested in?
That's a great answer. There's a much bigger picture. I agree with you. That could be a great topic for a future webinar. What does this look like in 3 years, sort of enterprise wide? So we've got one more question here I want to take. I think AI is very, very popular right now. I think it's growing rapidly. I think there's going to be a lot of adoption, but there are also some people who still have concerns about it. So I think this question comes from some of that mindset, and I'd love to address it a little bit. The question is this: is there an independent third party that regulates AI and advocates for its ethical use?
Yeah, Brian, I think this is the right question to be asking. I think most of us that have even just a cursory understanding of how AI is a paradigm shifting technology really have a healthy fear of how it's going to be used and how it's going to impact our daily lives. There is no single independent third party that regulates AI and advocates for its ethical use. However, there are a number of organizations that are working to promote responsible development and use of AI. One such organization is the Partnership on AI. It's a nonprofit group founded by IBM, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. And PAI's mission is really to ensure that AI benefits all of humanity. They've developed a set of ethical principles for the development and use of AI and are working to promote these principles through research, education, and advocacy. Our IBM CEO, you've probably seen in the news, Arvind Krishna was recently invited to the White House to discuss, among other things, the trajectory of the U.S. economy and policy around the growth of AI. And then, near the end of last month, the White House subsequently rolled out a sweeping executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI that aims to monitor and regulate the risks of AI while also harnessing its potential. So the executive order is sweeping in scope, requiring developers of powerful AI systems to share the results of the safety tests with the federal government before releasing it to the public. And I think it's a great first step, and there's a lot more to come on that. But I'll leave you with this. I read somewhere that the president became very concerned with AI and the future implications after watching the newest Mission Impossible movie. So I guess you could say AI made it mission possible. So yeah, that is a dad joke with a little AI mixed in. I definitely have a lot of those. So
No, thanks a lot, Jim. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It looks like we're just at time right now. I want to thank our audience for joining us and spending part of their day. I especially want to thank our panelists for their insight. It is much appreciated. You guys are the ones shaping this industry moving forward. So thank you for keeping us on top of what's happening. We hope the webinar was a great use of everybody's time. We'll be convening again in February of next year for our winter webinar. Please take a minute, if you're in the audience, to fill out our survey after the webinar. We appreciate your feedback. I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks for joining us.